We are continuing our journey in learning about the war for independence in Indonesia. Link to the original videos down in the description below. I also have a playlist to all my other Indonesian reaction videos if you want to get to know more about me and my journey about learning about Indonesia. Without further ado, let's jump right into it.
It's 1946 and World War II has ended. Teenagers all around the world foster an explosion of youth culture. This is the case in Indonesia as well, but with a violent twist.
Which, by the way, it's actually very interesting that I brought this up at the last video, and I'm pretty sure the one before that too. But the fact that there's like Indonesia seems to have like a consistency where a lot of change comes specifically from the youth, whereas other countries have it's usually older people or a different age, different demographic. But it's pretty crazy that it's been consistent.
Welcome to the Indonesian War of Independence, a time goes miniseries that follows that struggle year by year from 1945 to 1949. I'm Indy Nidell. Last year, I talked about British forces trying to maintain order in Indonesia as the Dutch get back on their feet after the war and try to resume control over their former colony. However, a nationalist spirit has arisen in the Indonesian people. Irregular youth groups assemble and radicalize in spite of President Sukarno's efforts to keep them contained.
Which one of you pointed out that I should have talked about this more. He was kidnapped by the youth and kind of forced to speak up for independence before it actually should have happened. Because, like, I gave my opinion of, well, of just the information I had at the time. Obviously, I don't know the whole timeline, so I don't know what might change. But at the time, I really felt like it would have been better to just play it cool, calm, collected, and really start just continuing to build infrastructure, you know, build your society while, still kind of staying out of the sight, really. Um, but instead he was, kidnapped and kind of forced to do that. So I did want to touch on that because that is a really big deal. That's crazy, because I was always, my whole thing is just like, how do you guys decide? But sometimes you do it by kidnapping other people and making them do it. So um, this is a very complicated and interesting dynamic so far between Indonesians, right? I'm not even talking about the Dutch, the British, eventually the US and Japan, but the dynamic between Indonesians is even more interesting and makes everything more complex.
Fighting erupts throughout Indonesia, and despite attempts by the British, the Dutch, the Japanese, and the Indonesian Republicans to stop it, violence sweeps the archipelago. That the youth movements are a force to be reckoned with becomes clear already when Sukarno proclaims independence in August 1945. Before he even utters a word of the Declaration of Independence, groups of young Indonesians take to the streets where they distribute leaflets and spread the word of the upcoming proclamation. They urge people to raise the red and white flag or to use Merdeka, meaning freedom, as a greeting. These groups of young people adopt the name Pemuda, meaning youth fighters, groups of which originated actually as communist youth movements. They operate independently of each other, though, and take orders from none as they commit themselves to fighting for the new republic. But they are increasingly confronted by the larger world in which they live.
Which, by the way, kind of crazy. Y'all told me this. Apparently, the communist movements were really started by the Dutch as a way to stop the nationalist movement for independence. So in a weird way, he says that they don't work together, but this is one of the common lies of communist movements is they say, oh well, they're never connected. They usually are. They just never openly say it so that they're not perceived as a bigger threat that they actually are. Um, but that aside, it kind of makes you wonder if the Dutch wanted more chaos because then it'd give them a chance to come back with more force. It's kind of like I don't want to put my conspiracy hat on, but these Dutch, I don't want to understand. We can't. We It's clear that they were very motivated on getting everything back.
Become aware of the contrast between their standard of living and that of the Europeans. In films, radio broadcasts, and magazines, they see, hear, and read how the Dutch enjoy a luxurious life paid for by the plundering of their Indonesian homeland, the decadency of the arrogant white leaders living in their mansions with dozens of Indonesian servants is an everyday reminder of the unequal balance of power. They are fed up and they are ready for change, and their methods are radical and violent. Last time, we saw how everybody starts fighting everybody at Java and Sumatra. The Pemuda are a catalyst in this violence, and not a small one either. 120,000 Indonesians were trained by the Japanese during their wartime occupation. The Japanese shaped the youth of Indonesia into a daunting military force and fueled them with anti-Western sentiments. But now the Japanese have lost their control over the radicalized youths. The Japanese-controlled armies are disbanded, leaving tens of thousands of leaderless soldiers.
So here's the thing, though. Okay, so is the Bermuda just really want? Because he says they're not controlled by anybody, right? Now that I'm hearing this and I'm really trying to think about it, is Bermuda just kind of like just a general term, or were there smaller, even like non-communist movements that were just youth groups that were wanting to just do their own thing? Because like it could just be that there's people who just like take advantage of the chaos, right? And there's just different groups of people who want different things. So does that word count all of them, or is it just specifically the counter movement to whatever the nationalist movement is? Does that make sense? Or is it, or not even the counter movement to the nationalist movement? Is it is it just anybody who was violent during that time from the Indonesian side? Does that make sense? I'm trying to phrase it in a sense that makes it here. Let me ask a better question. Were there smaller groups of people from the Indonesian side who were violent and causing chaos that may not have been part of the bigger groups that were they just had their own agenda? And if so, what were they? Right? Because it could just be that people wanted to seize land and just get rich. Some of them could be criminals. Who knows? We've seen certain countries throughout history, when something like this breaks out, criminals, like some of these prisoners would get out and create their own criminal government. Essentially, they'll seize a city or something. So, was that kind of going on too? Like, I don't know. This is what's really, I don't know. I just wonder if it's even more complicated than he's saying it is.
Many joined the Bermuda, who seized 20,000 rifles from the Japanese to add to their arms of sharpened bamboo spears and machetes to defend the Republic. One fighter writes how he joined the Bermuda. As a youth already ripe with military training during the Japanese occupation, I joined them and became a member of the Angkatan Pemuda Indonesia, the API. Every evening we would attack. The first targets were Japanese army installations. Then we fought, opposing the British and the Dutch. Another fighter explains how they handled those foes. Enemies were no longer taken prisoner. They die. They had to die. The corpses of the enemy were allowed to stay where they were sprawled out. The attacks continued. Always forward. Always attack. Kill and only kill. Which is more than unsettling for the Dutch, who are returning to what they think is still their colony. Former Minister of Colonies Hubertus van Mook, or Huib, leads the Netherlands Indies Civil Administration, NICA, a paramilitary organization tasked with restoring order under Dutch rule. They get a shock in January when they enter Jakarta. Posters and graffiti plaster the city, screaming pro-independence phrases like, "We will purchase our freedom with our blood," and "Up, Indonesian Republic, death with colonization." The troops arriving to the city are somewhat intimidated by these fierce pledges of allegiance to the Republic, but any delusions the locals may have about the Nika's purpose fade away upon arrival. They are here to secure their colony.
I mean, I mean, this it makes a lot of sense that they would, that the locals would quickly realize that. I mean, so were the Bermuda how much of the Bermuda was good intentions and how much of it was just violence? Because some of the other violent, I hate using the word violent sometimes because it may not mean that entirely. So if you look at some of the other revolutions or just power changes through some of the other parts of the world, some of these movements are violent because some of the factions in that movement just wanted to be extremely violent. So I guess like if you were to break it down like percentage wise, how much of it was like structured with purpose, like it's the messaging we want this, and then how much of it was like violence? Because it was it 50-50, is it 80-20, is it 60-40? Because if you lead too much with violence, no one will see you, no one will take you serious. They'll just call you violent. Does that make sense? So I'm wondering, obviously the Dutch are going to see it that way, but I wonder what other people around the world are seeing it as.
The difference between them and the Bermuda is that the Dutch are pretty well organized and well equipped. The various Bermuda are practically leaderless. It's a mass movement, though, and a true youth culture grows out of the Bermuda organizations. They let
Okay, so that makes sense. That answers my question. They're leaderless. That's good and bad.
their hair grow long to well over their shoulders. Some are unshaven. They wear high boots. They carry revolvers stuck in their belts. Such fashion statements mark their position in the revolution, even as they really are defining a nationalist identity for themselves, as anti-colonial sentiment permeates ever more of Indonesia. But they lack organization. They operate in scattered independent divisions and are not controlled by any higher power. Some public figures do align themselves with the Bermuda movement and do give them a voice in the media. BM Dia, for example, is a journalist and committed revolutionary even during the Japanese occupation. He helps Bermuda Group seize a Japanese printing press, which he then uses to print the radical paper Merdeka Daily, with updates on the nation's struggle. But it doesn't seem to really matter that the Bermuda are leaderless. They have the numbers on their side, and their mindset makes them deadly dangerous.
Yeah, that's oof, oof. I mean, some of y'all called it that it was going to get crazier, and I'm still every freaking video. I am so shocked how something can spiral so out of control and still spiral more out of control. This is really bad, right? And I know a lot of people, like especially young people around the world, feel like, yeah, revolution, blah 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 blah, violence, violence. It's like if you want people to really sympathize with your cause, you have to be humane at some point. And violence is not always going to be the best answer because sometimes violence will attract somebody who's always going to be more violent than you and they're going to win. So it's kind of like if you have some humanity, you can then become human. Does that make sense? But it's crazy because it feels like the Dutch want an excuse to be violent, the British want an excuse to be violent, the Bermuda want an excuse to be violent, or they don't. Not that they want an excuse; they are going to be violent. But then, what are the Japanese even doing in it? Like, are the Japanese just really just getting murdered at this point? Like, I mean, I guess what are the Japanese even doing at this point outside kind of helping, and I guess also rebuilding their country? But this is bad. This is real bad. This is chaotic. This is chaotic. I don't even know how anybody keeps track of this. I feel like, in my opinion, if you have this much violence going on, I think, not saying that this will happen, because again, I haven't seen the rest of the videos. I have a feeling, or at least I would guess, that people are just going to fight everyone. No one's going to know who they're fighting, and everyone's just going to be fighting, and that's it. Um, it's like if you put a bunch of bulls in a pen and they all see red, they're going to just charge everywhere. This kind of feels like that's kind of what's being set up. And what's kind of annoying, it feels like the Dutch want that though.
They have everything to gain and they have nothing to lose. They live by the words, better to die today than to live in misery, and once free, forever free. Their chants equate colonial rule with death, which eventually becomes a mantra for the general Indonesian population and a motor for historical change. Radical pro-independence units spring up around places like schools and universities, though the headquarters are often makeshift and only focus on regional activities. Hierarchy in the Pemuda ranks is simply determined by who's the bravest.
And that's a mistake. That's a mistake. You never like you don't want that because the most violent person will take charge. And that's how you get dictators. Like unironically, that's how you get dictators. That's why structured nationalist movements tend to do better than what this is. But at the same time, it's like it's good though. Like this is what's really confusing. Because like these movements at like colleges or the universities and places of learning, I still think that's okay. I think that's good. Like you're hosting conversations. I think it's okay to like push to have conversations. This is I want this to work out better than it's kind of turning into, but it feels like it's just going to get worse.
Ability, courage, that's all. Whoever is daring, put them in front, says one fighter about the disorder. But courage alone, that won't do against the Dutch, who are better equipped and trained and are pretty ruthless as well. In January 1946 alone, they kill 8,000 Indonesians, and with support from British troops, the Dutch secure a hold on the major cities. In many cases, this is accompanied by great tragedy. On March 26th, the British 26th Indian Division collides with the Pemuda in Bandung on Java. The Indonesian Republican Army is also there. General Sudirman, leader of the latter, knows they cannot defeat the enemy, so they accept a British ultimatum to evacuate the city. As the army and the Pemuda withdraw, though, they torch the south side of the city, burning homes and looting businesses. This gains infamy as the Bandung Sea of Fire. Some 200,000 residents of Bandung lose their homes and their livelihoods. It is a PR nightmare for the Indonesian Republican nationalists. But away from the cities, rural areas which have previously been sheltered from the revolution are now an easier target for the Republicans, even though it's been over 6.
So they torch their own city. I understand the import. I understand why some people they do that so that they can't use it. So you're harming yourself. This is what? That's crazy. If I'm understanding that correctly. Oh my gosh.
Months since Sukarno proclaimed independence for the nation, the rural areas are only just learning about it, and they are ecstatic. Many of them live in poor social and economic circumstances, and their colonial governments still maintain a feudal system. Class tensions now explode. Many local upper-class leaders had enriched themselves over the backs of their fellow countrymen by working with the Dutch, and now the lower classes take revenge. In what is called the East Sumatra Social Revolution, sultanates are overthrown and whole aristocratic families are killed. Communist groups also join in, seizing the opportunity to help start the class war. This buys some time, though, for the Republicans to get their facts straight, which is easier said than done. The Pemuda, for example, are associated with the Indonesian National Party, the PNI, but they're really only loyal to Sukarno directly. But in the eyes of some, and especially in the eyes of the Dutch, Sukarno is a fascist who collaborated with the Japanese during the war.
What? But that doesn't even make sense on paper. What? It's like it kind of reminds me of modern day America where everyone just starts calling each other Nazis and like fascists when they're clearly not. Like, well, I mean, technically, well, you would say so. Like fascist, for example, fascist. If he was truly fascist, um, I guess it's the same thing. It does the Pemuda demonstrate could either be fascist or communist. It just This whole thing is confusing. I'm trying my best to keep up, but there's too many people going rogue and just kind of doing their own thing that it's really confusing.
So while he keeps on in the background as president, Sultan Syahrir, a Dutch-educated Indonesian nationalist who we've seen before, is appointed prime minister. This signals that the Republican movement is, at least on the surface, willing to compromise to settle things with the Dutch in more ways than with just violence. Of course, as was already the case when Sukarno was pressured by the youth movements to declare independence, the Pemuda care little for compromise, freedom, or bloodshed, right? The Pemuda class with Syahrir, who does in fact want to negotiate with the Dutch. Syahrir is not willing to have his efforts sabotaged by bands of wild youths, so he has the army arrest 12 prominent Pemuda fighters in May. In reaction, huge demonstrations erupt demanding their release, and ultimately, recognizing the power of the people, General Sudirman releases them. It is clear that there is no centralized leadership by anyone, really, and other fringe groups smell opportunity and rush to the stage. 141 political and military groups unionize, calling themselves the Union of Struggle, led by communist Tan Malaka. Now, though the Pemuda originated as a communist youth group, they are now more aligned with Republicans, right? In fact, pro-independence youths call communist forces their musuh, their enemy, just like they do the Dutch colonizers.
Because technically, okay, so that is technically right on paper, right? So this is where I'm getting confused. Oh, okay. So this dynamic makes sense. Communists don't like independent personal freedoms. They want everybody to essentially be the if everyone's slaves, then no one's slaves, essentially. That's what communism is. Whereas like nationalism, it believes in personal manifestation of what you can do and all that stuff. So on paper, this makes sense like this. But as someone looking in, it's like, who are these Bermuda? Who really are these people? Like, did no one write down all the different groups, or were there just that many things going on? And they just said, you know what, we're just going to use this one word for everybody. And now, as someone trying to learn this, it's hard to keep up. It really is.
But now, like Tan Malaka, they share a mounting distaste for Syahrir's negotiations with the Dutch and his lack of urgency for the whole independence process. So on the 27th of June, Syahrir is kidnapped and crowds gather ominously outside government buildings. In a chaotic struggle for leadership, Sukarno orders the release of Syahrir and for the radicals to all be arrested. This becomes known as the July 3rd affair, and is the day that the Republican government and the army undergo a dramatic reorganization, swearing to take on more of the Union of Struggle's commitment to total independence from the Dutch. Still, months later in November, Syahrir negotiates an agreement with Allied representatives. By then, all British soldiers have been withdrawn from the islands, but in their place are 150,000 Dutch soldiers under Van Mook, deployed there with the sole purpose of restoring colonial order. British diplomats arranged for the Dutch and the Indonesians to enter political talks to reach some agreement about the future of the nation. In the Linggadjati Agreement, signed November 15th, the Dutch recognized the Indonesian Republicans as the de facto authority in Java, Sumatra, and Madura. That power is to be cemented in a federal United States of Indonesia.
That's not bad. Honestly, I'm surprised that they even were willing to even do that. I'll be honest. It's low expectations, right? Because it's like I didn't think that I didn't think the Dutch would even give you anything at that point, because they're just like so much violence right now. But that's like kind of why you want to sometimes negotiate and get to talking. Talking violence is only going to lead to more violence. Once you start talking, things can start happening. But I'm actually shocked they even did this. And I wonder if it's because they wanted to, or because like there was outside forces like the Allies pressuring them to do that. Because it feels like me personally, I don't think the Dutch would want to really do this. Ah, I'm not trying to give them the benefit of the doubt when they've clearly done things that would be the opposite of what this is. You know what I mean? Like I said, I just don't give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's still cool that this actually you were able to get this, considering all that just happened.
where they will share their power with other states. The USI would remain tied to the Netherlands under the Dutch crown in a Dutch-Indonesian union. According to the agreement, the USI must become a reality by the first day of 1949 at the latest. But though this might look like a light at the end of the tunnel, both parties have a sour taste in their mouths. This sentiment is crystallized on the battlefield just days after the agreement is signed. On November 20th, the Dutch make an attack in Bali in the Battle of Margarana. The youth of the Pemuda are not satisfied either. Not at all. They continue their brutal guerrilla campaigns against the Dutch as before. To them, securing national independence depends on eroding Dutch imperial stamina, which will come at a great cost, because the Dutch too will grow relentless in their struggle to regain control. And anyone who thinks that peace is around the corner has not been paying attention and is likely a big target to one, both, or all sides.
Oh my god. This series, I just got chills. This series is going to get brutal. What did I say? What did I say earlier? If you lead with too much violence and you only know how to communicate with violence, and your leader is whoever the most violent is, you're going to attract someone. Your enemy is going to be someone who is always going to be, you're always going to attract someone who's more violent than you. Okay? Because there's always someone out there crazier than crazy than crazy. Okay? This is what's happening. But it feels like everybody's doing it. Does that make sense? Like, it's almost like a mini world war going on right here. There's so many factions, so many people involved, and the US hasn't even got involved yet. So, you know what's funny? I think it's crazy that he starts off, it says this right after I was like, oh, I'm surprised they even gave you that, to them being like, it's not going to work out. Like, so they were reluctant. So they did lie. So they were just trying to, see what happens, but then want an excuse to then be violent again. God, the Dutch are so awful.
If you'd like to see a Between Two Wars episode about how popular culture changed after the Great War in the 1920s, you can.
This is probably the most confusing episode of anything Indonesian wise, because to make the point, it's like the what certain things, like if like classifications on paper, like definitions of things, if you try to apply it to this, right, like your nationalists, your communists, your freedom fighters, your blah 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 blah, as soon as you try to apply it to this whole scenario, it kind of just doesn't make any sense, because it's like everyone's just literally just saying things and just doing things. They're not there's it's just But I will say this. I do understand the dynamic. So once some of the lines are a little bit more clear, I think I'll better understand what's going to happen and like why things are going to go the way they're going to go. But I'll be honest, I don't even know how y'all teach this in class. This part of history. Like, how do you teach this? Really? Without it being so confusing. Like, if I had to take a test in class, I would be so like, how do I answer this? How do I answer this? Actually, how do I answer this? like, like even writing a paper on this topic would go on forever, because it just seems that there's too many things happening. Does that make sense? That like, it actually makes sense, and it would be really hard to even keep track of some of this stuff because there's just too much happening too fast. Wow. Wow. This needs to be a TV show. Someone needs to make this a TV show. This Indonesian history needs to be on HBO Max right now. Let's call Warner Brothers up. Hey, or Netflix, hey, let's get it going. We could even make it an anime because anime is popular right now. You know, we'll figure it out. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. And by the way, sorry I've been slacking on uploading. I've been pretty busy with work, but also, um, yeah, I've just been behind. But I love this series, and I'm not giving up on it. And we got more videos. And buckle up. Love you guys. Check out the next one. Bye-bye.
This video is brought to you actually by viewers like you. Thank you so much for subscribing and being part of my journey and allowing me to be a part of yours. Let's create new memories this 2025 on our road to 1 million subscribers. And with all that jazz out of the way, I just want to say thank you so much. I love y'all and enjoy the video.